Hello and a very warm welcome. Today we're going to explore a really powerful argument for a single creator, and it's one that's been around for 1400 years. What's so fascinating about it is where it starts. It doesn't begin with some complex philosophy or in a grand temple. Nope. It starts by just asking us to look at the world around us, from a tiny seed all the way to the stars, and to simply find the signs.
And our journey into this huge theological idea begins right here, with something incredibly small, something we all know. The Quran points us to the simple yet powerful act of a seed splitting open. It's a moment we've all seen, but here it's being presented as the very first piece of evidence in a much, much bigger case.
And that's really the whole method of the argument. It's designed to take us on this journey of perspective. We start with the micro, something tangible, like a seed in the ground, and from there, it just builds and builds its case, all the way up to the macro, the structure of the entire universe, and ultimately, the nature of the creator.
So let's dive in right where the text begins, with a single seed. The core of the argument here is that everyday miracle of germination. The text points to life just bursting forth from what looks like a dead, totally lifeless object. And it presents this as the first, and maybe the most accessible, sign of a divine power at work.
Now the power of this idea is packed into one specific Arabic word, falik, which means the cleaver or the splitter. You have to remember, in its 7th century context, just using this word was a direct challenge. Pre-Islamic Arabian pagans believed that different gods were in charge of fertility and growth. This verse basically reclaims all of that power, saying that the fundamental act of splitting a seed to bring forth life comes from one single source.
Okay, so now watch how the argument builds on this. From that one little seed, it dramatically zooms out. We're asked to lift our gaze from the ground right up to the sky above our heads, and to start reading the signs that are written all across the cosmos.
And there's that word again, falik. The cleaver of the seed is also the cleaver of the dawn, splitting the darkness to bring forth the light. That connection is totally intentional. It reframes the sunrise not as just some random thing that happens, but as a deliberate, purposeful action.
And the exact same logic is then applied to the night. It isn't just an absence of light. The idea here is that it was made for rest, for tranquility. So all of a sudden, the simple rhythm of day and night isn't just happening, it's presented as a system, a design with our well-being right at the center of it.
The argument just keeps going, next with the sun and the moon. Now, in so many ancient cultures, these were worshipped as incredibly powerful gods. But here, they get completely recontextualized. They aren't deities to be worshipped. No, they're presented as tools, as instruments that were created for a very specific job, to help us calculate time and organize our lives.
And the stars? They get the same treatment. For the desert and sea travelers of Arabia, stars were literally their GPS. The text confirms this practical purpose, framing them as a divine guidance system. And at the same time, it refutes their use in things like astrology or fortune-telling. Their purpose is guidance, not worship.
So after looking at the whole cosmos, the argument then turns inward, to us, to humanity itself. It makes this claim that all of us originate from a single soul. Now, at the time, this was a really radical idea. It directly went against all these tribal myths that said different groups of people came from different gods. Instead, it argues for one, single, unified origin for every single person.
And then the argument comes right back down to earth, pulling in more evidence from all this rich agricultural imagery. It points to rain as the source of all life, the incredible design of layered grains, the sheer generosity of low-hanging fruit. And it highlights this beautiful principle of similar yet varied. You know how the exact same water and soil can produce fruits that taste completely different. The text presents all this artistry as pointing to a single artist, which again countered the beliefs in all sorts of rain gods or other specific deities for crops.
So up to this point, the text has been so carefully building this case from the natural world. But you have to ask, why? Well, now the argument pivots, and it reveals the specific beliefs that it was designed to dismantle from the very beginning.
And that's the critical question, isn't it? This whole thing isn't just a nice poem about nature's beauty. It's a structured argument, a polemic. So who is it aimed at? What were the specific ideas that it was trying to correct?
And here are the targets. The text identifies these specific beliefs from that era, things like supernatural beings called the jinn were partners with God, or that God had sons, or that he had daughters. But the crucial point is how the argument frames these ideas, not just as theological mistakes, but as claims made without knowledge, without the very evidence that, it argues, nature provides so clearly.
So, with all that evidence from nature now on the table,
the argument moves into its final phase, a direct, logical rebuttal of those claims. And this right here is the central rhetorical question. It's the core of the logical challenge. It's basically asking the listener to think about a simple fact of procreation. You need a partner. The text applies this very basic worldly logic to challenge the theological claim of a divine son. And the key to that whole question is this term Badi'a, the originator. The text defines God as the one who creates from absolute nothing, with no pre-existing model and absolutely no partner. So if that's your definition of the creator, well then the whole concept of needing a companion to have a child becomes a total logical contradiction. And so after laying out all the evidence from nature, and after delivering that logical rebuttal, the argument builds to its climax, a final, powerful declaration that just summarizes everything we've heard. This is it. This is the thesis statement, the ultimate conclusion of the entire passage. It asserts that the being who designed the seeds and the stars and the cycles of life is the one and only Lord, the creator of everything, and therefore, he alone is worthy of worship, not all the things that he created. And the argument ends on this really profound, almost transcendent paradox. You see, unlike the pagan idols, which were physical objects you could see and touch, this creator is beyond human perception. You can't see him, but he sees and perceives everything. This was a massive shift from a physical, tangible idea of divinity to one that is completely and utterly transcendent.
So when you step back, you can really see the elegant path this argument takes us on. It starts with tangible things you can see and touch in nature, it finds purpose within them, it uses that purpose to contrast the older beliefs, and then it applies simple logic to get to its final destination, a single, unseen creator.
And that really leaves us with a final thought. This 7th century text proposes a very specific way of seeing the world, as a book of signs, where everything that happens has a purpose that points to something greater. So the question for us, whatever our faith, is this: how might adopting that kind of lens, actively looking for signs and purpose in our everyday lives, change the way we see the world around us? Thanks so much for joining me.